important intellectual, political, community discussion. And you all have made that possible. I'm delighted. It's November. It's the week before holiday, and this turned out amazing. So thank you so much for being here. Shameless plug once more. If you haven't started following us, we exist on X, IG, and Facebook. Please give us a follow if you haven't already. We have a lot of cool stuff planned for the spring 2024 semester. We hope you will continue to join us in January. On that note, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Ethan, who will tell us about what we have in store for January, as well as introduce our speaker for today. Thank you all for being here.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're doing well. Just wanted to give us a quick little reminder that in the spring, the first event that we're going to have for this colloquium is actually going to be with Michael Lede, who's going to be speaking with us in regards to mixed Black and Japanese folks and their online presence in social media, and figuring out how do those presences and online profiles help us navigate mixed race identities and whatnot. And so if you can, please come join us on January 12th, which is yet the first Friday of the semester, in this same room, 12 to 1:15, and we will definitely have food and refreshments available, as we always do. So, and again, appreciate you all for being here today. And I'd like to welcome my colleague, our newest colleague, one of our newest colleagues in the department, Dr. Mary Yu Danico, who joins us from after many years in California doing a lot of research on ethnic identity, community building, and most recently does work. We did two conferences in Korea recently, where you presented a little bit about Gen Z experiences and millennials and how they've been navigating this sort of time. And you've constantly been a wonderful mentor to me, and it's great to see you as a colleague. And I can't wait to hear your talk today, titled "Remembering Our Past to Make a Difference Today." And yeah, if I can, please come up to the front.
Hey. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. You're all awake, right? All right. Okay, cool. I have to thank my colleague Ty for bringing me kava. So I'll be, yeah. He got me into this a while ago, and so if I seem kind of mellow and relaxed, you'll kind of know why. Thank you so much. I am so honored to be here, part of the Colloquium series with Women's Studies, American Studies, and Ethnic Studies. It's such a treat to be able to talk to all of you here. And when I call Professor Lee like my little sister, and not in a patronizing kind of way, because I have a lot of love for her. We've known each other for a long time. I didn't know what I was going to talk about. So she asked me, do you want to come and talk? Do you want to talk about Gen Z stuff? Do you want to talk about K-pop stuff? I've done a lot of different kinds of research over the 25 years that I was at Cal Poly Pomona. And so I'm going to experiment a little bit with all of you, if that's okay. Can I have your permission to do that? Okay, thank you. I thought, I really wanted to incorporate some personal, but also highlight the work that we're doing at the Center for Oral History in kind of indirect ways, and highlighting the importance of ethnic studies in particular in the work that all of us do, and how oral histories actually can be implemented in so many different kinds of disciplines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about oral history, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about these epiphanies I've had in my life by doing oral history with my own family, and then give you a sample of what we can do, like remembering the past and an example of what folks have done to make a difference today. All right, so let's see how it goes. I hope it resonates for you all. And if you need me to talk louder, I do have a very loud voice, just let me know. And if you have questions in between, also let me know. All right, so, oh my gosh, I have the biggest gift ever. I get to be the director at the Center for Oral History. Like, how awesome is that? And I get to work an incredible colleague. I have an associate director, Micah Mizkami, who has been there for a long time, at least 5 years. And I have incredible students, research assistants who are here as well. And we have the honor of collecting memories and preserving history. that is a real honor, right? It's a tremendous honor to be able to talk to people in our communities, talk to our elders, to kind of have them recollect their memories, to fill in the gaps of histories. For a lot of us who are trained in the social sciences or trained in humanities or even the sciences, we miss something sometimes as parts of history when we don't hear from the voices of people who've lived them, and especially the people who remember. For the longest time, scientists would kind of minimize the importance of memory collection, right? Preserving memory. But in fact, memory collection is really the way that we can kind of like colorize the history around us by hearing the voices of the folks who have lived it, or from their children, or for the communities who may have heard stories from generation to generation to generation. So as when Hejin asked me to speak, and same with my colleague Ethan, I was trying to think like, okay, I'm kind of reflecting here a little bit. I'm trying to imagine, what am I going to talk about? And then I decided, okay, I'm going to ask myself some questions, right, to kind of get to that point. Yesterday, I got on a Columbia University oral history Zoom, which I love this quote from Madagascar, you know, and I won't try to speak the language, but the translation is, the land that sustains you is the land of the ancestors. And I thought, this is so in line with what we've been doing at the center. And I'm not sure if you can read this from our New Zealand oral historian, Nepia Mauika, is many, but not all Indigenous peoples share our views of the importance of Native knowledge and orality. But there's more of a consensus that listening to Indigenous peoples is important to understanding the ways we define history and how oral history for us is reliable. Intrinsic to an Indigenous cultural universe, vital to how we remember, tell our stories, and make sense of ourselves and the world around us. And so at the center, we really, really value the New Zealand oral historian, Dr. Mauika. And he is actually going to be coming, as a little plug, we got a grant where he will be coming to UH Mānoa next April, the first week of April. So we'll make sure we let you know about that. But as I was even thinking and reflecting, I was beginning to think about diasporic oral history networks. I mean, when we think about oral history, it is a lot of times folks think it's more like American Indigenous. And so now we know in Hawaii, we should know it's Oceania, there's Polynesian, but there's also other parts of Asia, parts of Africa that have had the tradition of oral history. And so today I'm going to be talking about Korea. So some of you commented on my dress. Thank you so much. It's a modern hanbok, right? And this is the first time I'm wearing it. So yeah, I thought, what other place to wear this? And as I'm wearing a modernized version of the clothes of my ancestors, you know, it does help me kind of think about, did my family participate in oral histories? Not really. Did my parents, you know, mom and dad, grandparents, and I didn't grow up with my grandparents, but did they tell me stories, or did I even ask? No, not really. And I'm going to kind of unpack that a little bit, okay? But oral history is a tradition across the globe, right? And so when we begin to think about the frameworks, one really great way that in Korea that oral history has been in existence for a long time was through pansori. So how many of you have heard of pansori? Yay! It is an incredible, I think you have to be an athletic person, or like, it's like to be able to sing, one person is telling a story through song, sometimes up to 3-5 hours. And usually there's one drum that's accompanying them, right? And it's usually stories of loss, love, sorrow. And when you ever have an opportunity, and you can go on YouTube and find them. And by the way, there's a really cool fusion pansori where it's flamenco, like Spanish guitar and pansori together. So people have been kind of experimenting. But pansori is really one of the original oral history traditions of Korea, is through singing, through storytelling, through telling about what folks have been going through. And when you think about the word like pan, it's about where people gather. So usually pansori has an audience, right? And sori means song. I never really understood the significance of pansori growing up. My parents would listen to it and my dad would love it, but they never really told me like why. And as a young immigrant child, it never really quite resonated for me, in terms of why is this important? And then when you think about, pansori, it's really also about like survivance story. And so, an indigenous scholar by the name of Gerald Vizenor talks about how indigenous peoples have not only survived, but actively resisted the ongoing pressures of settler colonialism in North America. And let's unpack that, right? Survivorcy story. And when you think about pansori, and it happened before Japanese colonization, it happened before even the brief moments of Chinese colonization. But let's unpack the impact of settler colonialism on people, right? The traumas that is induced. And I'm going to talk more about that too. And then I also kind of looked at transmission lineages. And this is kind of from a Tibetan Buddhism idea of transmission lineages and the notion of lineages. And I'm really going to focus on the ear whisper lineage of humankind. And that's really the oral transmission, right? The oral storytelling. And so part of the Tibetan Buddhism is there's 5 levels, but one part is really about storytelling. It's about sharing that information. So I kind of, in this experimental effort here today, I'm looking at survivance story and also the transmission lineages combined as a framework of trying to understand my family, myself, Korean community, and what's happening today. So I began to really go back to Han. And I just gave a talk about Han in relation to food when we're in Korea. Do you all know what Han is? Okay, a couple of people, okay. Elaine Kim back in 1993 wrote after the LA uprising, wrote about Han is where the home is, right? I didn't get it. Elaine Kim was a mentor to my sister when she was at UC Berkeley. Love Elaine, wonderful, wonderful scholar, incredible feminist, one of the original Asian Am diasporic scholars. I didn't understand what, even after reading her article, it didn't quite hit me. Like, what does that mean to say Han is where the home is? And I think one of the challenges I had as a graduate student, as an undergrad, that I realize now is that, yes, I get that Han is about sorrow. I get that Han is about anger. Some people say it is the Korean rage, which is kind of funny. I get that sometimes it's about feeling like vengeful or revengeful. And some scholars and some people say all Koreans have Han, right? Is that why we're so tough? I don't know, right? And it's like, it's playing into a lot of stereotypes, but there's some truth to the notion of Han being within community or generations that have experienced the oral stories of their families or have experienced collective stories of their communities. So, it's really Han is through storytelling. I mean, that's when it really comes to fruition. It's through these stories. It's through the songs like pansori, through poetry. It's really a language. Han is about like humanity too. It's like not being apologetic to feel. We shouldn't feel ashamed to feel anger and sorrow, and sometimes revengeful, right? And so Han is like a multi-layers of emotions and feeling. And some scholars have said that Han is like aloha to Hawaii, Han is to Korea. I don't know if that's actually true. Like, I'm not sure because I haven't really investigated that, but it is an interesting idea, isn't it? That Han is such a fabric of Korean community, and it's rooted in storytelling. So home is where the hun is. When Elaine Kim wrote about this, you know, I was trying to, I actually was in Hawaii at that time. I was a graduate student in 1992, and then I left in 98, and then her article came out in 93. And I spoke to Elaine about this, and she was trying to explain to me the impact of colonization, impact of Asian settler colonialism in Korea. And, you know, she wasn't quite naming it that at that time. And I don't know, it was really hard for me to process it. I don't know about many of you. Like when you're hearing these theoretical frameworks, for me, I was still trying to unpack it, trying to understand it. Ideologically and theoretically, it made sense, but it still didn't come home for me in the same kind of way. And so as I'm reflecting on it, you know, then you realize, like, you know, Korea was under the occupation and was colonized by Japan for 35 years. From 1910 to 1945, right? And some people may say maybe a little bit before then too, right? Maybe not officially, but we definitely had the presence of Japanese people in Korea. We definitely had presence of Korean people. For 35 years, you know, my ancestors' home where I was born was a place that we were colonized. And it was part of the Japanese settler colonialism, right? And folks like my dad were told not to speak Korean. You know, they were forced to, it's a form of cultural genocide, forced to not speak the language, not sing pansori, not do the dance, not wear hanbok, and erase our identity. And for folks, I think for a lot of indigenous communities, that resonates, right? Because it happened to so many folks who have been survivors of colonization. And so I thought about this, and I always try to remember, like, why does my mom blow up for every little thing, right? Like, we used to call her the volcano because she had such a hot temper. And why is it my dad never talked, right? So, and as I began to think about the colonial period of all the different things that went through, my parents were born during this time. So both of my parents are now gone, but my mom, and I'll talk a little bit in a few slides, but my mom was born in 1930 and my dad was born in 1932. So right in the midst. My dad hated the Japanese, hated them with a passion. I'm also part Japanese. I didn't know this until recently. My dad hated the Japanese, and my mom was actually a closeted half Japanese person, right? And so it's interesting, like the things that people hide and people suppress, right? And I think my mom was pretty smart for hiding it actually at that time. So going back to survivors and transmission lineage. So I'm going to talk about my parents in a bit, but I just had a recent epiphany. Any of you know who Yu Guan-sun is? Have you heard of Yu Guan-sun? Do you know Yu Guan-sun? So I was told, if you don't know who Yu Guan-sun is, you're not Korean. That's what I was told. They're like, if you don't know who Yu Guan-sun is, then you're not really Korean. I'm like, oh my gosh, I guess I'm not really Korean because I don't know who she is. Well, it turns out she's my great-great aunt. I had no idea. So the story is, she is considered the Joan of Arc of Korea. She was 17 years old when she was arrested and tortured by the Japanese. And she wanted freedom, Korean independence from Japanese colonization. And when after she died, people demanded to see her body because there were rumors that her bodies were chopped up because she was tortured so badly. It turned out that her body was intact, but she was definitely brutally tortured. And during one of the major uprisings for independence, a bunch of people were murdered, including her parents. They told her that they would give her a reduced sentence if she would just tell the Japanese who else was part in cahoots for Japanese liberty, and she refused. And so she died in prison. So she's pretty big stuff, right? So when I was told by a friend of mine who's from the Korean embassy, say, you are related to her, because I shared with them my genealogy. It's genealogy, my family's genealogy is written in Hanju, which is like the Chinese version that I can't read. So it's not Hangul. So they were helping me translate it. And she said, I'm pretty sure you're related to her. When I look at the town that you're from and your family genealogy, it points to her. And I said, no, my parents never told me, my dad never said, my relatives never said anything. I don't think so. But I go, that'd be cool. But no, I don't think so. Well, so I asked my cousin, who's about 5 years older than I am. And he said, yeah. I said, do you know who she is? She goes, of course we know who she is. Everyone in Korea knows who she is. Yeah, someone told me we're related to her. He goes, yeah, we are. I'm like, what? Why didn't you tell me? And so we got into this, and the thing is like, yeah, it's like, 3 generation, like great aunt. And, that's why your dad hated the Japanese. So, and like a lot of the things started to kind of make sense. I mean, obviously, yes, I understand why a lot of Korean people hate the Japanese during that period, right? But even more so, it was like very, very personal in their family. And one of these things that she was very insistent is that she said that Japan will fail to her death. She said, even if my fingernails are torn out, my nose and ears are ripped apart, and my legs and arms are crushed, this physical pain does not compare to the pain of losing my nation. Wow. I'm like, wow, she's a rock star, man. I'm so honored that I could potentially be related to her. I'm still kind of like not in disbelief, if that makes sense, right? I'm like, I still can't believe that's actually true. So how is it possible? How come like no one told me? And so going back to my parents. So my mom is on the far left with my grandmother, my Halmoni, who I did not know until about 15 years ago is Japanese. And my mom was born in Japan. And I remember growing up that my Halmoni would, when I would go see her, would just pat me on the forehead, like rubbing it. And I used to hate it, but they would like rub my, and never really say anything. And now I realize it's probably because she didn't speak Korean. I used to always think like, how come she doesn't talk? Is she really that shy? Like I used to always wonder, and I was just like 5 years old, right? So that's my mom. In the middle is my dad, and that's a picture of him, I think in Vietnam or Philippines. I think it was the Philippines. And he worked quite a bit. And that was them, I think in the early period. It looks like a major propaganda picture. But that was them, I think before they had this. I think my oldest sister was born already. And what my dad told me is that had he known my mom was half Japanese, he would never have married her. There's no way. And I understand that, right? I understand that anger and resentment of the part of who she is. But I also understood like, my mom's smart, right? My family story is a total Korean drama, because the other part that I'm not really talking about is that I found out I actually have a half brother somewhere, because my mom was pregnant before she had a child. She had a brother, and K-drama, her best friend ended up taking her boyfriend and left. So the father of her son never knew that she was pregnant. Sounds like a K-drama. For those of you who know K-drama, you know what I'm talking about, right? And so I was raised with my oldest brother thinking he was my cousin, because my grandparents raised him. So there's a lot of different like secrets in our family, right? There's a lot of things that I recently got to unpack before my dad passed away. And he was the one that actually started, because I started to ask questions. So my dad, I call him Daddy. He was born Yu Danico. He was born in 1932. His nickname was I'm like so many different names. His nickname was Bongju. And in 1948, he changed his name. Okay, in 1948 is when Korea was established as the Republic, right? So it's he changed his name, and it's an interesting story, is because when the war, before the Korean War, there's a lot of upheaval for those of you who study Korean history. And some of his siblings opted to go up north, and others opted to go down south. And so the northern brother of his ended up making it very difficult for the rest of the family to get positions or jobs with the Korean government, because they were accused of being like communist, right? So he ended up changing his name before the actual war started. My mommy had a Japanese name at birth named Kyoko. And, because the Soshi Kamai was a lot of the Koreans were kind of forced to adopt Japanese names. And so she was born in Kyoto, so her name was Kyoko. And then she got her name back, her Korean name, and realized who she was in 1948. To me, it's so interesting that both of them had Korean names, new Korean names, whatever names it was, in 1948, exactly the same year that Korea became established as a republic. And then they got married in 1958. And I tell you about them because I think a lot of times the silence and secrets has a lot to do with the Asian settler colonialism. For the lack of storytelling or asking is because during the whole period of colonization, they were not allowed to speak. They were not allowed to have their voice. They are not allowed to be who they are. And so I think this generational trauma that they shared during that period carried over to the United States. We came over to Guam, then to Hawaii, and then to the continent in San Francisco, and it stayed with them. And, and then there are different stories that my mom would periodically tell me about, and this is like these was after we, like before I was born, but she would tell me stories about things in the 60s. But then she also told me about a period when in 1949, when she found out what the Japanese actually did after she was living in Korea, and she started to participate in protests. She says she would go into the protests with a bunch of college friends, and her father would give her a blanket because he knew what she was going to be doing and told her to be careful. And she told me of one incident where there was a raid by military forces, and they were starting to arrest all of them. Now, for those of you who know Korean history, you also know during this time, a lot of people who were arrested were also tortured, detained, and, for long periods of time. And so she heard stories of this, and so she kind of freaked out, and she's like, oh my God, we're all gonna like get beaten up, and so this one police officer recognized her and said, aren't you related to, I can't remember, I don't even know my grandfather's name, it's not horrible. Aren't you related to so-and-so, her dad? And she said, yes. And he's like, I know him. He would be so ashamed of you. Does he know you're here? Of course he did. And she's like, no, he doesn't know. And so he said, okay, tell me the names of all your friends and I'll let you guys go. So she just met these people. So she's just trying to remember all the names of the people that she just met. And so she was able to go. And I think she was telling me, and a lot of times, when your parents tell you stuff, you don't really totally believe them. I don't know. But she would tell me about, yeah, I could have been a prisoner. And I'm like, yeah, sure, mom, Korean mom, housewife who's an activist. But she's always had that spunkin spirit. She's always been like that. My dad, on the other hand, was pretty internal. So anyway, I just want to kind of point out Korea's awesome about social movements or protests. I mean, I think they have it down in that they can make things happen, sometimes to their own detriment. So if for May 18 in 1980, we were all in the United States at that time, but the Gwangju uprising happened. Have any of you heard of the Gwangju uprising? Yeah, some of you. I was so thrilled when I talked to my colleague, Brahim Audi, when I was telling him about going to Gwangju, and he said, oh yeah, ethnic studies, we were protesting in solidarity with the people of Gwangju at that time in 1980. I'm like, really? He's like, yeah, like that was horrible what they were doing. People call it the Korean Tiananmen Square. It's actually way worse, I think, because it wasn't the square, it was the whole city. It wasn't just this one area. I mean, Tiananmen Square is horrific, right? But the whole city of Gwangju was under siege, and people were killed, basically assassinated during that period. So when you think about all these things, there's definitely intergenerational trauma, right? No wonder my dad didn't say, no wonder my mom would flip out and blow up and yell. A lot of the things started to make sense. When you are not allowed to be you, if your nation is taken, if you're not allowed to be who you are or be free to express yourself in your own language, in your own culture, there's part that is, I mean, beyond trauma in many ways, right? And so, you know, we also talk about in terms of, I used to always kind of think about my mom a lot, like, why is she acting this way? It's because it's very complex trauma, the trauma that she has. It's not just colonization, it's also the abuses. Physical abuse in schools were very, very much common in Asia. Is also like, you know, witnessing violence. They were there during the war. They saw a lot of things. My dad would tell me about being chased by fires. And I think because I was little, he tried to make it like it's these ghosts that were chasing me around. They're like fires. Those were bullets. There were missiles. He was escaping fire that was literally trying to kill. So he would share with me, I think as a kid, trying to protect me. And he would go into a trance and say, there are a lot of dead people. I saw a lot of dead people. And then he's like, anyway, and then just kind of get out of the trance and not talk about it. There's a lot of physical and medical neglect during that time. You know, when folks are part of who are colonized nation, you're not paid attention to, malnourished, don't get medical attention, no physical attention, and that's definitely emotional neglect. Emotionally, no one is talking about well-being emotionally, right? So there's a lot of complex trauma that impacted my parents and people of Korea. So when you think about the Gwangju uprising, these are some images from just on the news, right? If you go online, you can see the military, the Korean military seizing Gwangju, taking over the streets and brutalizing and beating people. So this summer, or actually this October, we got to go to Gwangju. This is a museum in 245. It's a building where a lot of the folks, young people, mostly young people, college students like yourselves and professors and citizens would escape the brutality of the military, gunning them down into this building 245. And in that building, they still left the bullet holes. They were shooting at them into the building. You can see bullets everywhere inside the building. They still kept them. And I bring this up because I think that Gwangju is a really wonderful example of how do you remember the past to make a difference today. In Gwangju, they're using what happened to educate, and I'm hoping that we can probably do oral history there because that's the one piece that's not really readily available. And this is the 245 building. So if you imagine the building outside, and they have, you know, a mock of the community, there were helicopters basically swerving around the building and shooting at people and killing people. There's also a side-by-side of what the streets look like before and what the street looks like now. So these are the streets where people were attacked and killed. And that's where we were looking down at it and we're like, wow, it's really different to hear about it as opposed to actually see it, but also hear the stories of the people who've been there. It's a very humbling and angering experience, right? Like got really pissed off. I got the Han in me. Another angle of same place from the top of 245 that we can see the fountain where the people were congregated and things, you know, just massive civil unrest and peaceful protests that turned violent because the military got involved and the US didn't do much to help in that. But there is a way to make a difference. And so I was telling Professor E that his pictures are gonna be up there. We got to visit Gwangju and learn from the community. Part of oral history is that, and this is what academics do poorly, I can say it because I'm an academic, a lot of academics tend to be very voyeuristic. We go in, want to see what's going on, want to hear the story and come back. But there's no continuation of how to make a difference. And so one of the things that we've talked to with the folks at Gwangju is that how do we incorporate oral history into this. So that way there are people, 1980 is not that long. There are people who are still living there who remember what happened. There are lots of parts of this history that can be filled. And so Taeyoung Kim was our incredible, host who used to work for the embassy that connected us with a lot of these folks. So we went on this like educational area where you see the remnants of Japanese colonization still in Gwangju, but also the revitalization and restoration of how Korea was for the communities that are there. And even in terms of creating new space. So this is part of the 245 museum that we were looking at. But this is also a new space that someone from Gwangju, or actually he's not from Gwangju, but he's invested in Gwangju, wants folks to understand the complexities of trauma on communities to revitalize and restore Korea for Korea's people. So Jimin created this makerspace, converted an old hospital into a place where folks in the community can come in and create, whether it's through art or whether it's through woodworking or technology. And so that's a picture of, I think, Dr. E and Dr. Campos over there, because we were doing recordings with them as well. And I think one of the things too is, I'm gonna end it because I know my time is coming up, but I want to end it about like hope too. Hope doesn't mean you forget the past. Making a difference today or thinking about how we can make things better, it's so critical that we know our history. Because without understanding our history, we're kind of starting from nothing. And it's so critical that we rely on our elders or the folks who can talk about that place. I think Gwangju for me is an incredible example how talking and getting stories and collecting oral history, which I hope we can help them with because they've invited us to come back, will help make the story more complete in many ways. If you think about genograms or other types of studies where you kind of have facts, years, it misses the humanity. It misses the stories. And what we're hoping to do in the next step is to go back to Gwangju and begin to talk about how do we collect oral histories, not ourselves per se, but helping the community, training them on how to collect oral history or learning from them on how they collect oral history and building a community in that way. So anyway, I hope that experiment worked. I'm going to drink some kava and thank you so much. She said 12:45 ended, so 2 minutes early.
Thank you so much. That was really wonderful, I think, interplay between your personal experience and the, stunning endeavor of oral history. I just want to turn it all towards you now. We have some time for questions. If anyone has a question, I can run over with this tiny but powerful mic.
I can't believe how quickly that went. It's so fast. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to speed it up.
It was great.
Well,
just for recording purposes.
I was wondering, I watched the movie A Taxi Driver a long time ago, and I was wondering if you could talk maybe about, if you've seen it, your reaction to that movie, or another movie that talks about your parents' history.
I have not seen Taxi Driver. Yeah, I think I heard about, I wasn't ready to see Taxi Driver, if that makes sense. I think when I watch Korean films or Korean dramas, I have to be in a particular mood. And I knew that The Taxi Driver was about what happened. And I don't think I was ready to watch it. But I think after having gone to Gwangju, I feel like I have a responsibility to see how people are depicting it. I know that in Korea, folks really love the film. I think that there's many different types of films related to May 18th. There's actually a K-drama series that's about May 18th too. So I can't really speak to that film because I haven't watched it. But I know that folks in Korea really felt that it was a honest and respectful depiction of what happened. Yeah. What did you think of it?
Well, not knowing much about Korean history, not knowing much about Korean history, I think it was just an eye opener to this specific time. And there was this element of kind of like what your dad did, was kind of disconnect and tell you a version that you were able to hear. There was this humor that the taxi driver had that I remember. And then the middle of the movie gets really dark when he himself realizes what's actually going on. And so it was kind of like you were taken on this journey with this person who didn't know what was going on. And then when you realized, you're realizing at the same time as him. And it was, so I like that cinematography aspect, but again, I am very unfamiliar with Korean history. So yeah.
And Gwangju is about a 2-hour train ride on the bullet train, like equivalent to a bullet train from Seoul. So it's quite a bit, and it's in the southern tip. And Jeollado has always been a place where there's a lot of civil disobedience and social justice and activism, and that's where my family, the Jeollado region, is where my family's from too. So it's, a lot of my friends jokingly say, now we know why you're the way you are, because it's in your blood, right? But I'm so proud of that, though. I'm so proud that folks in Korea are still, many times, putting their lives at risk to speak up. And they don't only speak up, but they take action. And sometimes with, a lot of political issues, and we're witnessing those kinds of issues right now, sometimes it's hard to be on the side of human rights. Sometimes, capitalism fuels, our society. And there is a way of massaging it, and there are ways of presenting it in a way where it polarizes communities. And, I think one of the things, like, and not to get too political outside of Korea, but, I've been saying this a lot. I think if you are for human rights and anti-oppression, there is no pick and choosing. It's not like a cafeteria, like, this oppression is okay, but this oppression is not okay, right? If you're against apartheid, you can't pick and choose apartheid, right? You're either against apartheid or you're not, right? You can't just pick and choose. And I think folks like to manufacture it in a way, like storytelling could be dangerous too, depending on who's doing the storytelling, right? And so I don't know why I've got off on that tangent, but I think the whole issue of, like, if you are pro-Palestine, somehow you're anti-Semitic, absolutely not, right? I'm against anti-Semitism. I'm against Islamophobia. I'm against genocide. I'm against apartheid, right? It's human rights. You can't pick and choose, right? So I think sometimes people we're in a society that's very dangerous right now, that people are trying to make it like, if you're on the side of student protesters, somehow you're a communist. Like, that was the whole commie button thing, right? If you're on the side of trying to do against the military complex and the neo-colonial mentalities that still perpetuates in Korea, somehow you're not with Korean nation. That's not true, right? And so I think it's a dangerous time, but it's also an opportunity. I think more and more people do need to speak up, and I think folks need to kind of address that we're for human rights and we're against all of those other things, right? And I think it's hard. It's a really, really tough period for folks because it's scary, it's part of this cancel culture that could be good and bad, right? So, and, I think if any of you feel that in your own departments, as a faculty or as a student, I feel with you and I stand with you, if you're feeling like you're being under attack for standing up for what is right. And it also goes with women's rights, it's transgender rights, LGBT rights, right? Human rights is human rights. Sorry, I got off on a tangent. I don't know why, but yeah.
Aloha. Thank you so much for your talk. And I think it's a great example of how we, the interconnectivity between the personal and the professional. So I guess my question is, since 1995, there's been the Gwangju Biennial. And I wouldn't know that, but for the fact that I'm working on a project and one of my co-curators had curated the Gwangju Biennial.
So I guess I'm interested in hearing your thoughts. Increasingly, there are artists who are working with the archive, are working with oral histories. And I think it's really interesting too that the Gwangju Biennial is also like co-sponsored or was co-created by the city, you know, and so recognizing the role of art, contemporary art, in responding to trauma, and this notion of then intersecting with oral histories and the archives.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And you know, Gwangju is known to be the art city of Korea. Gwangju is more than 245, right? I mean, that is a horrible part of the history, but the art revitalization is amazing. Like, I mean, I want to go back to Gwangju and spend more time because I want to learn from the folks there. And I think one of the beauty of oral history is that, as you know, a lot of us who are in the research arena, if you think of oral history as data, right? If you think of it in that way, that could create art, inform art, and that includes paintings or sculptures, but also plays, includes music. I mean, if you think about the art of pansori, that is from oral history, right? So I think art is an incredible way. We were invited actually to Dr. Caldwell, and I'm trying to get Rod to go, and I've been talking to Ty about trying to go too because of the role of the military. We're invited to go to Gwangju during their anniversary next May. And so we're really trying to make that happen. And so so we can learn more. I feel like even though I was born in Korea, I haven't lived there forever, and I'm definitely not from Gwangju. And so I feel like I want to learn more about how they're utilizing these stories into art, because it's such a magnificent art community down there. Yeah.
Mining the archive.
Yeah.
Which is actually sounds incredibly extractive.
Yeah.
So I also think that's the flip side of these artistic interventions where it's like trauma, you know what I mean? We're gonna display our trauma or somebody else's trauma,
right,
for our own artistic you know, whatever
endeavors or whatever.
Yeah. So I just think it's interesting that that's the ethics of grappling with this.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there are definitely ethics in collecting oral histories, and then how people use oral histories. There's definitely ethics in that. And sadly, just like we're talking about how people manufacture stories, people will, because we have, for those of you who are not familiar with the Center for Oral Histories, you can go on our website and there's archives of transcripts and things. And we've had folks from all around the globe come to us and say, we've learned so much from these oral history. But what people do with that, right, is like, how do they use that? And do they mine it, or they preserve it? And are they thinking of it as voyeuristic mentality, or they're thinking about ways that they can collaborate with the community? I would hope that anyone who's doing work on Gwangju works with the people of Gwangju, right? As opposed to seeing them as subjects to study or to work about, but work with them. And I think that's why when we go back, I'm by no means an expert on Gwangju. You know, I mean, it was my first time going there. I'm no expert. So I want to keep going back to learn more, you know, and hope that I can somehow contribute in some way. Yeah, but I appreciate your comment. It's absolutely right.
Thank you. Well, on that note, I'm curious if you've seen, or if you just have an idea of what like non-voyeuristic depictions of oral history can look like. I mean, like even just exploring these archives, I'm seeing a lot of like photos of people, and I understand that like in some ways that might be seen as voyeuristic, but and it sounds like it's a lot to do with the audience's interpretation of it. But just like different ways to increase its chance of being like viewed respectfully.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think, you know, the center, you know, like my predecessor, Deviana McGregor and Tai Tengon and Micah, who has been there for a long time, are very mindful about the ethics of presentation. So the narrators are the folks who are being interviewed for the oral histories. They get the final say. You know, it's a process where it's not where we collect the oral history and then, okay, that's ours and we get to do whatever we want with it. Not at all. It's really their story, and they can come back and they look at the transcripts, they look at the photos that we picked, they look at the video, and they tell us, like, they very much know what's going on. We can't really control to the fact that there are going to be some folks who are not going to, we can't control some of that, right? But we can control the fact that what we put out there is not something that we deem that we should be putting out there, but that our community elders and the community folks who have given us the privilege of talking to them have said, this is good, or can you not include this? I want this picture, but I don't want this one. So we know that it is a process where they have agency, you know, and it's not something that we impose on them. And so I think that's something that we feel is really important. You know, and I think that's the same thing when those are the stories that we're collecting here, as well as we're branching out into diasporic oral histories, that we have a lot to learn. And so I think we're in the process of kind of really learning about how does this work in the diaspora, right? And so it does get more complicated too with language, you know, and all that kind of stuff. But I really appreciate your question, because I can't say I can guarantee no one's ever going to do that, but we can say without any hesitation that our narrators are always part of that process. And I think that's really important. Yeah.
Thanks, Mary, for this wonderful presentation and also lifting up the work for the Center for Oral History. I really love the way in which you showed us that, you know, oral history in whichever form, even photographs, also tell a bigger political story. So I found it really exciting, the last slide where you're showing that, you know, makerspace, right?
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering how that could be incorporated as part of oral history. So it would take you a little, or anybody conceptualizing oral history take us a little bit away from this collection preservation model, right?
Right.
Or even as, you know, including art, like what, so, I mean, what I'm really excited about is to learn, you know, in what ways would this project, you know, expand these ways in which we think about oral history as a repository, right? And just as a repository. So that's one question. The second question is about your use of lineage. I was curious for you to expand on that. And the third question was you referenced something called ancient Vedic South Asians. Do you know what that is, or you could share it with me? Because I'm just like very cautious about these kinds of Vedic recuperations of our history through a Hindu nationalist frame.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I'll share with you the citation where I got the things, like after we get out, because I can get it for you. But your first question about the makerspace, Jimin is a 34-year-old like millennial Korean who has been creating this makerspace, very like really innovative in terms of providing agency. Like his focus is really like on young people. You know, he really wants to help revitalize people's sense of being, not leaving Gwangju and not like the brain drain that's happening around the world, but keeping people there by creating spaces where people could be creative. I want to bring him here because, to be honest, this time when I met him in Gwangju at Makerspace, this is the 5th time that I've met him. All the other times he's met me in Seoul, and and he doesn't speak English, and my Korean is good but not awesome, and so a lot of times, you know, I'm trying to like look up some of the vocabulary. I think there are incredible opportunities to do something with him, and we want to learn more. And I think I would love for him to come here because he's also doing Makerspace in Palau. He's looking at islands, so he got a grant from the Korean government to think about Makerspace, and it's a theme of islands. And so I think he went to Okinawa. Did he say that he went to Okinawa? He went to Palau. I think he went to Taiwan. I think he said he wanted to go to Okinawa. And so I think he's very interested in Hawaii as well, like to learn from here. So beyond that, I can only tell you I'm learning about the whole makerspace model. The second part of your question,
Lineage.
Oh yeah, the lineage. So this was from And, I only picked out the third part because it's really about the part that I understood is the oral tradition of from generation to generation. So the way I'm thinking about lineage is like generation to generation. It's different. So I guess I'm modifying probably the true Buddhist way of doing lineages. But the part that I liked about the 5 area is the idea that through different cultures, the notion of transmitting knowledge from generation to generation has always been around. And that I think I was trying to highlight that like Korea for the longest time was not Tibetan Buddhist, but was a Buddhist country, and a lot of the way folks thought about, and it was Confucius too, right? But it was like the religion of choice before Western missionaries got there was Buddhism. And I think that did have an influence in the way people thought about transmitting knowledge and from one generation to generation. And even before, like even the language use or the written language in Korea changed from, Chinese character to when we created the Korean characters. And so there's a lot, Korea has been a country of a lot of shifting and changing, but the oral traditions actually have always been there. And I think that was my point of trying to show that.
Yes. Thanks. I mean, my caution was just around, the association of lineage with biological
No. Yeah.
lineage. So
Yeah,
thank you for
yeah.
clarifying that. And also the elitism of lineages.
Right.
There can be quite a bit of elitist.
Yeah. No, it's really more about generational transfer.
you, yeah.
Not necessarily by
Yeah.
blood. Yeah. Thank you for that. And I love these, I really appreciate like Monisha's and others' comments because it helps me really unpack and think about it. So it's really helpful. So thank you.
Hi, Mary. I really liked your presentation. So one of the most impactful things for me that you shared was about your dad and how he was recounting like being chased by fire. So when he shared those memories, albeit like scattered and abstracted, could that also be defined as a type of oral history because he's outlining his experience and humanity from his own like background and passing it on to you?
Yeah, no, I think so. Thank you. Yeah, I think so. And he shared that story of the fire chasing him when I was like 8 years old. Yeah. And that story was very vivid for me, so I can remember that story. He recently have been sharing more stories that led my family to think that he was a spy for the US government. Yeah. So, and I won't tell you what the story is because I don't have a lot of time, but I'll just tell you the anecdote is that when I was in Korea for something, my kids went to visit him. When in the last couple of years, he was in a facility because he can't see and he can't hear and he couldn't walk. So he became permanently disabled. And so when my family went to visit him when I was away, my daughter said, "Harabaji, were you a spy?" And he's like, no. So then when I came back, I said, "Daddy, I heard that the girls visited you." And he said, "No, yeah." And then they asked if you're a spy. He goes, "No." I said, "Were you in intelligence?" "Yeah." And I said, "Oh yeah." And the girls asked if you ever like used a rifle or a gun. He goes, "Oh yeah, no, I don't do that. I wouldn't do that." "Did you carry a 45? "Oh yeah." And he would tell me stories and then he would like try not to tell me after he gets into these zones where he would tell me stories where clearly he was doing stuff, So one of the things the reason why I started to unpack my family's history is that my big end project is to kind of be almost like Helen Zia, although I'll never be Helen Zia. But like Helen Zia's book, Last Boat Out of Shanghai, is based on her mom. Like one of the people that she highlights in that book is her mom and the oral histories that she collected from a lot of the folks. I want to be able to tell my parents' stories. It's so like I think my parents are really interesting. And my grandfather is also quite interesting, who went to Japan. He was taken, but he ended up working with the Japanese government. That part is real. And I can't find that side of the story. So my dad's side, I'm able to find lots. It's easy because of sexist patriarchy. But in terms of with my mom's side, it's really, really hard to find because genealogy is tracked on patrilineal lines. I don't have a birth certificate. So I know I'm going off a little bit, but I don't have a birth certificate. I don't know where my birth certificate is. I don't know if my birthday is my real birthday. I know that my legal birthday on paper that you all see is not my real birthday. I do know that. My dad messed up on the green card. So I know that's not my real. But because my dad changed his name in 1948, our lineage is shot. They cannot trace me directly to my descendants. The only reason why I have a genealogy book is because my cousins shared with me up to the point that my dad was born with his birth name. But after his new name that he created, so he didn't have to go to war, although he almost did, our genealogy kind of starts with my dad because he created his new identity. So, and we have to ask, like, why did he do that? You know, so there's a lot of questions. But yeah, thank you for that. I do think of his story as oral history for sure.
Thank you. I think I speak for all of us when we say we want to know about the spy stories.
Sometimes I feel like I'm watching a movie when he tells me his stories. I'm just like, oh my gosh, really? And I have recorded him on some of the stories. I started to record him, like, and I wish I recorded my mom. You know, like my mom's stories she's more like a tragic Korean drama, and my dad is like more like an action Korean drama. Like when I hear his stories, yeah.
Hi. Part of what I was going to ask was already addressed, but I'll ask it anyway. I also appreciated your stories about your parents, your family, and you know, this trope of sort of the woman or the mother, grandmother being the storyteller and the father being more the quiet type. I mean, that's such a common trope among many Asian immigrant, right, Asian American, you know, communities. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that gendered aspect of storytelling and also silence. And then the second question is more broadly about kind of the ethics and methodology of oral history. And how oral history can approach silence, because oral history by its very nature is about collecting words of people who speak, right, and then preserving and passing on. But many people uphold silence for various reasons. And how can oral history kind of respect that silence and make something of it? Because without sort of just privileging the words that are spoken, that also creates and reproduces certain kinds of, you know, uneven dynamics.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, thank you for that. I think in relation to your first question, the person who told me most of the stories are my dad. And my dad is actually the quiet one. And my mom would talk. She can talk to anyone, talk story, anywhere, really friendly. But when it comes to the past, she didn't talk. She never told me she was part Japanese. She never told me that. She had early dementia before she passed. And so my dad told me, because he thought he was going to die. So he wanted me to know all the family secrets before he died, but he didn't die. And so then when I saw my mom, instead of saying, Mom, how come you never told me you were part Japanese? I was raised by triculturally. I was raised Japanese, Korean, and, you know, American, whatever that means, right? Although I never felt American, but we were raised in that context. But what I did with my mom is that I just pretended like she had told me. I said, so Mom, remember like when Harmony is like Japanese, like what was that like? So I just pretended like she had already told me without making her feel bad and shame that she didn't tell me. So my dad was the one who has been the storyteller. He's the one that told me about like a lot of the different kind of trauma. Only story my mom ever told me was about the protest. But all the other things that I'm unveiling about our family was from my dad. And what's interesting is growing up, he was the quiet one and mom was the yakety-yak one, but never about her past. And so I think that's kind of interesting. I think substantively, I think he felt like I should know. I think that's why he told me. I think he felt like everyone kind of knows but you, so you should know, even though he didn't say that. So the gender in our household was not the stereotypical type. And I asked my dad a lot of questions. Growing up, I spoke to my dad in English and my mom in Korean. My dad's English was always really good, so I felt very self-conscious about speaking Korean to him because I felt like it was never quite good enough. So I always spoke to him in English. What was interesting though, toward his latter, about, you know, like 3 years before he passed away, he would cognitively, it's interesting what the brain does, because when I would speak to him in English, he didn't respond. But if I spoke to him Korean, he did. And so as he got older, we began to do Konglish more. You know, I code switched a lot with my dad. And so I was very lucky that I was still able to be able to speak Korean with him. And so that was very interesting. And I think that's when a lot of the, I don't know, more like interesting for me anyway, things came out from him is when I did the Konglish. He shared a lot more when he spoke in Korean. I think in terms of ethics of oral history, we would love to talk to you more about that because it's more than just a soundbite. You know, I think Micah's done a phenomenal job of doing workshops, you know, with a lot of folks on campus, you know, who are interested in learning how to do oral history, the ethics of oral history. So we'll be more than happy to give a presentation to American Studies on how to do oral history. Because I think it deserves a little bit more time than what we have today. But I can assure you that we're all learning. You know, I don't think any of us claim to be the experts on oral history. We're trying to learn from our diasporic communities who are doing oral history and trying to gain the best knowledge from that and continue to rely on our ethics, right, to ensure that the stories are like protected, not in a like a I don't know what's the term, but I mean protected in the sense that the way people who are telling the story wants it to be protected. So we'd be more than happy to do that if you're ever interested. See, thanks to Ty and my awesome.
Thank you. Hi, I really appreciated your talk, and I am especially grateful that you felt comfortable with all of us in the space to share those personal details about your life and your family as well. My question was about the comment you had made about how becoming an academic or investing into academia kind of like invokes this voyeuristic desire when it comes to research and when it comes to furthering your studies. And I want to ask, because you're a part of the like Center for Oral History, that like for me personally, whenever I did research, especially about like Korean events when I was a younger child, I couldn't learn about it from my family. So I did like a lot of like research, look into libraries, look online. And the thing that I noticed a lot is that a lot of the written texts that I found were written by authors that never had even been in Korea. They were like doing like distant studies or just picking off what they knew through translation, even not speaking one-on-one. And I wanted to ask then, like, do you think like when it comes to academic work and specifically the kind of like focus on history in like the past written like kind of ancient methods of like history, like because a lot of people connotate the first parts of history through written means, not through oral means. And so I wanted to ask, like, does like trying to progress yourself into academia, do you feel like it sets up people to falling into that category of like becoming like voyeuristic in that sense, only wanting to engage with people's like lives and stuff as like a kind of like static thing to study and dissect? And like, is oral history then kind of like a counteraction to that, where you're talking to people in movement and you're interacting with them currently? I want to know more of your thoughts about that.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. You know, so I think I mentioned that, you know, I received my doctorate here at UH in sociology. And so I was very lucky. I did have very good mentors who are no longer here. They left when I left. You know, they went to Hong Kong. But even when I did not feel that supported when I was a student here. I only found home in the Department of Ethnic Studies. While I was getting my PhD in sociology, I was looking at the impact. I was looking at Korean American identity process and specifically the 1.5 generation. And ethnic studies became my academic home. It became like a place where I felt safe. It felt like a place where I can do community work. I can talk to folks about their lives and be seen as real work. And so if it wasn't for ethnic studies for me, I don't know if I would be here today. That's me. I think it's so important to be grounded in community action work, you know, and to really be able to, for me, social justice has always been the center of what I do. And ethnic studies, for me, has always been that place. Not just here in Hawaii. I mean, so I left, you know, 25 years ago, but as a graduate in the sociology department, but the people I stayed in touch with were the people in ethnic studies, because tied into my values. And I think as we have more people like you entering and more people like us, right, entering in the field of academy, it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be voyeuristic. I think, Dr. Dasgupta does incredible work with labor and always with community engagement. And because I've known Monisha for a long time too. And I think it's being conscientious about the kind of work we do and not being like the experts, right? I think some academics lack humility, which is a problem, but doesn't mean all academics are like that, right? I think the more folks we get into positions where that's why we want students to take ethnic studies classes, that's what I personally want students to, and American studies and women's studies, right? Because I think it helped me so much to know that how I was thinking about research or questioning the way I want to do community research or looking at ethnic identity was good. Like I don't know, it's not like I needed validity or like someone to say or it's promising, or they challenge me to say, have you thought about this? Like what you're thinking is this way of looking at it from a very old school, because we're trained in the way that we're trained. And so I think that's why I feel that ethnic studies, which the center is under, the Center for Oral History is in the Department of Ethnic Studies. And I can tell you, when the dean asked me why I was applying for this job, if it wasn't in ethnic studies, I wouldn't have applied. I wasn't endowed chair, so I wouldn't not have applied if it wasn't in ethnic studies. So I love the work of the center, but if the center was not in ethnic studies, I don't think I would have applied, because I know the values that are so important to, if you look at the ethnic studies movement, right? If you study that at all, which also spawned out Chicano Latino studies, Asian American studies, women's studies, like a lot of us benefited from the work of those who fought for ethnic studies, having representation, having our stories told our way. That's so important. And I think oral history under ethnic studies continues that tradition, right? Of being able to tell the stories the way the folks want to tell the stories. So I don't think it has to be that way. And I'm very encouraged that you asked that question, because to me, that means, yeah, we're going to be more of us, doing this kind of work. And we need more of you to, grad school isn't for everybody, but if you're curious and you have a lot of questions and you want to kind of explore, research, I would encourage you to come talk to me or talk to a mentor that you're very close with or a class that you've been really excited about, and explore that. Because usually for BIPOC students, and especially for women who are BIPOC, we are never actually ever told to really think about PhD programs. I was never told. So, it's just kind of, and I'm a first gen student too, right? So for a lot of first generation students, it's kind of foreign, like, oh my gosh, we have imposter syndrome, all that stuff. But I think that's where, if you can find a place, a department, and I think many of you, I know that, Hedgen's awesome. And I know in the women's studies, American studies, I know the students get a lot of support. I can tell you in ethnic studies, you also get immense amount of support. If you can have a community where they're trying to elevate you, right? And challenge you. Elevate you doesn't mean like, oh yeah, what you're doing is good. It's about challenging you so you could expand whatever you want to do, whatever your goals is. So if it ends up being in a nonprofit or winds up going abroad and studying abroad or teaching abroad, doesn't always have to be grad school, but whatever you want to do is supporting you in that way. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's for me how I see the center is rooted in ethnic studies.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful answer to my question. And I would want to just ask one more little thing. Do you think the study that you talked about, or the framework of thinking when it comes to memory making and memory collecting, do you think that can be applicable to more studies within academia?
Yeah, absolutely. I know that, the talk that I went to from Columbia oral history was archaeologists talking about how they're using oral history. I know that landscape architects use oral history to kind of inform how gardens were, let's say, for example, in internment camps. So absolutely. I think people have to do that with mindfulness. I think that's the key thing. And that's something that, you were asking earlier, like the ethics of it. And again, we can't police or control people's ethics, but we can only hope that through good training that folks will understand and have a sense of responsibility. You know, there is a responsibility in folks sharing their lives with us, right? And so absolutely, I think it can go into so many like STEM fields too. There are ways, you know, like oral histories can really help people become better practitioners. I know that public health had did the Kapuna project where they're talking to elders about how they're receiving, you know, health and support. Those are really like incredible, right? To be better supporters in our community. So absolutely.
On that note, I'd like to encourage everyone to check out the website for the center, right? It's full of resources for students and professors where we can initiate our own projects, use the resources and transcripts that are already there. Please join me in thanking Dr. Danico for spending this time with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for all the time you've spent with us this semester. Please remember January 12th, Friday, we'll be back right here again. Okay.